Welcome to another edition of Newsmaker Live right here on DBS Television with me, Timothy Polio. We go up until 10 o'clock this evening, at which time we'll be concluding with the clip that peaked. We're focusing on a very important sector on this evening's broadcast, and that is the education sector, because we are very much into Teachers Week, and tomorrow, by the way, will be World Teachers Day. We have as my guest the president of the St. Lucia Teachers Union, Mr. Julian Monrose, who's also the president of the Caribbean Union of Teachers. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you, Tim.
And congratulations on the observance of Teachers Week and, of course, tomorrow, World Teachers Day.
Thank you.
Where do you get the time and the energy to serve in the dual capacity of president of the St. Lucia Teachers Union and president of the Caribbean Union of Teachers?
Well, I've been asked that question so many times. It is an area of interest. It is what these organizations represent, the profession that I belong to, that I believe in. And one must have the passion for what he does. I believe in education. I believe in the trade union movement. I think that's what gives workers the strength, to carry on, to do what they have to do. And I just feel committed, so the energy will come because I have the passion for what I do.
At this time, what are the issues you think that are impacting the education system at both the local and regional level that warrant some kind of special attention? In particular, is there one issue as opposed to focusing on several issues? Any one issue that's dominant now?
Yeah, at the last biannual conference of the Caribbean Union of Teachers, which was held in St. Lucia, in late July, early August, one of the things that was clearly put on the agenda is the whole question of health and safety in schools. We're finding that in too many of our schools in the Caribbean, and St. Lucia is no exception, that the quality of the infrastructure in our schools leave much to be concerned. And we're talking about educating young people. So we're asking ourselves as educators if that's the environment that we educate them sends a powerful message to them. So if it is not healthy, if it is not safe, are we sending a message to them that these things don't matter? So when we talk about health and safety, we're not just talking about the health and safety of teachers, but even more importantly, that of the students.
What does it say with regard to the authorities paying attention to the aesthetics? Because that's very important. You walk into a school, and then based on what you see, it leaves you with a particular impression. And this is not an issue that's unique to infant or primary schools, but also to education institutions across the board. The authorities, the government ministers will tell you that they have a challenge on their hands, and that is to provide the police with the necessary tools to fight an emerging, if not an existential threat, that is crime. You have a situation in the health sector. You have to man our various hospitals with nurses and also doctors. Why should any government decide to give the lion's share of the finances, invest the lion's share of their finances in education, because they're already doing a whole lot in terms of investing the budget in education?
I'm not too sure about the lion's share, giving the lion's share to education. I'm not even too sure that you need to give so much more than what you are giving to education. What is very clear to me and to many of us who are involved in education is that the resources given to ministries of education are not very efficiently utilized. So if we can make a more efficient use of the resources given to education, I'm sure we're going to achieve more. But also, it's very strange that governments find money for anything that they want. We cannot find money to repair schools. So many schools are in a dilapidated condition. But if, for example, the President of the United States makes an announcement that he is going to visit St. Lucia next month, I assure you, we will find all the resources to host him. We will patch every road that his entourage would pass on, and we will find the money, to have all kind of lavish activities.
But
And sometimes this goes into the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
But
So it's two things.
it's not very often that a
Yeah.
prime minister would be hosting the president of the United States. And if this happens, the prime minister in turn could tell you that it's a quid pro quo kind of arrangement where, for example, if you spend lavishly on the president of the United States, if you impress him, then chances are he will be doing something that will be beneficial to the entire citizenry.
But this is just one small example in terms of, just to bring out the point, that when we say no resources, but when we want to find it for what we want, we are able to.
But isn't that the posture that's normally taken by employers? Generally, as a trade union leader, I'm sure that you can attest to that. Employers tell you we cannot give you an increase in salary, but if they could, if they have to invest in terms of the enhancing the plant, enhancing in terms of machinery, adding new technology and so on, they'll find the money to invest because they will tell you the ROI, the return on investment, will be significant to the extent it will have a positive impact on the employees.
Yeah, so you're making my point. It's not clearly
I'm just saying
a case of no resources.
I'm just saying
it is what
sometimes
they choose to do with the resources.
right, and the employer would tell you that the investment on the ROI, the return on investment, will be huge. It will make life easier and it will increase productivity as well.
Yeah, just that when you're talking education, it's a little different.
Yeah.
Because you're talking your people, and that is our greatest resource. If we don't develop them, then this country is in trouble. So you cannot postpone developing people. So you cannot postpone what education can deliver, because it is education that will take our people to the next level. It is education that will allow our people to remain here, those who want to and compete, and also go out there in the world and to be able to compete with persons from everywhere. So we couldn't postpone a child's education. We couldn't postpone human development.
Earlier on, you made reference to the efficient use of the resources invested in education. Are you making particular reference to the Ministry of Education in terms of how it utilizes the finances at its disposal for the education sector?
Yes, the Ministry of Education under the Ministry of Infrastructure, because we have a very strange arrangement of late. Because before, the Ministry of Education had a department that took care of school repair. In fact, some of these people understood school and the school environment, and that department was dissolved, and school repairs are under the Ministry of Infrastructure. What we're finding is that the people in the Ministry of Infrastructure, they're saying about roads, they're saying about bridges, they're saying about, and sometimes they do not understand the things that we understand about school. What we've come to realize is that arrangement is not working. So that is one point. The other point about the resources, sometimes, Tim, I can tell you as a principal, you wonder about some of the contracts. You see, now principals have no say in who gets contracts, but you see some of the money spent on some of the works done, and you wonder about it. You wonder whether, in fact, the government and the ministry is ensuring that the government and people of St. Lucia get value for money. There are things that the government would pay that, I'm telling you, if the schools were allowed to manage themselves, they wouldn't pay so much. So that is what I'm talking about, the more efficient use of the resources that we get for education.
Okay. Earlier made a point about the Ministry of Infrastructure. You have the St. Lucia Teachers Union and also you have Principals Association. How do you convey that message to the authorities that having a separate Ministry of Infrastructure to look at the rehabilitation of schools and so on, that is not working? How do you communicate that to them?
Well, we have had meetings with ministers of education. We have had meetings with officials of the Ministry of Education to indicate that. And they know of the problem.
What has been the response?
Is that they will engage in discussion. The usual thing. You postpone dealing with it by saying, well, we'll engage the Ministry of Infrastructure. Well, but nothing is happening. It is a simple thing that if There are 105 schools thereabout. And there's a lot of human activity in those schools. You need to have a department within the Ministry of Education whose responsibility it is to go to the schools and so that you do not wait until something deteriorates to a very bad extent for the repairs. Now, principals all the time report these things, but principals are not trained in infrastructural, so they would report that I see something, but you need persons who can come in and make the correct recommendations so that these things can be taken care of on a timely basis. The Ministry of Education and Infrastructure seem to have forgotten the old saying that a stitch in time saves 9.
How do you prevent the perennial occurrence of school opening, particularly after the long summer vacation, and then you hear either a principal or a minister of education, irrespective of which administration that's in office, saying that we're unable to open this particular school on time, primarily because we did not get either the finances or we did not have adequate time to deal with some infrastructural problem? How do you end that practice?
Tim, is clearly a lack of proper planning. We all know that the school year ends in July and begins in September. If you wait for August to determine what level of work, which schools you'll work on, what level of work you will do, obviously school will reopen and you will not be ready. We as a teachers union, we have time and again advised the ministry that the planning for school repairs should begin very early. Ideally, by May, the ministry should be clear on what works will be done at schools. If you need to tender, you do that early. You get your contractors in place. By June, by middle June, your contractors should be in place. So as soon as school closes, the very weekend, if we close on the Friday, your contractors should be mobilizing resources already, so that by the Saturday or the Monday, they can move in and begin the works. It's as simple as that. Plan early, determine what needs to be done, get your contractors by middle of June, ensure that your contractors move in as soon as school closes, and by the time September comes, school will be ready. So the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Infrastructure just need to do a little planning. That's all.
What can the St. Lucia Teachers Union do to ensure that this does not happen again?
Well, the Teachers Union believes in dialogue. And so we meet with the ministry, we try to impress upon them. Even during August, we meet with them to determine where the work's being done, etc. We also would write to them once schools have made us aware of infrastructural problems. We would write to the ministry very early. We would engage them. The other thing we can do is to exercise our trade union right to withdraw teachers from schools once we believe that the health or safety is in jeopardy. We do that as a last resort, because children's education is very important to us. So we prefer the dialogue and hope that the ministries will understand and do what is necessary. But sometimes we get to the point where we say no. We have been speaking. Sometimes you go to the schools and the ministry will tell you, oh, the principal has not informed me. And the principal can give you a file loaded with letters that have been sent to the Ministry of Education. When it gets to that point, the union must stand up and play its trade union role to say, no, our members will not continue in that condition. But you know what? While we say our members will not continue, that is, at the end of the day, it's not even about the teachers. We are really protecting children, because we have said to the Ministry of Education, you cannot begin to destroy children's lives. They're going for an education to make a meaningful life tomorrow. And in that same institution, the health is being destroyed. What is a very educated person without good health? What is the value of the education to you if you don't have the health to utilize it?
Why do you think that this has happened under both administration and involving many ministers of education of differing backgrounds, even educators. The likes of, for example, you've had Dr. Robert Lewis as a former educator. This has happened during the reign of Mr. Asin James, himself former educator, and the late Louis George as well. And now, university lecturer Dr. Gail Rigobert.
Some of the persons you call, they have been members of the teachers union, but I'm not here representing ministers of education. But to be fair, sometimes it's not even the problem does not even lie at the Ministry of Education. Sometimes it's the Ministry of Finance. Finance, all they see is the dollar, and they ask, well, where's the return from education? And the question is, or the response, if you believe there are no returns from education, then let's just try having an uneducated population and let's see how much we can make. Because if your resource is not fully developed, then the country cannot be developed. So part of the problem is the ministry convincing persons at the Ministry of Education that while the return on the dollar may not be immediate, but it is important that you invest in people. So that is part of the problem.
How educated is the St. Lucian population?
How
educated is the St. Lucian population?
Well, I would have to.
What's the rate of literacy?
I would have to do a
St.
survey on that one, which I have not carried out.
But we don't have any figures on that?
Maybe the figures exist, but I will not venture a response to this because of recent times I have not read any literature.
What's the last figure do you have, dating back to the last time?
It is so old that I wouldn't quote it.
Why?
Perhaps because I don't even remember it.
But don't you think by now that should be at the flip of a finger, the tip of your tongue?
Yes. I take responsibility for not knowing it.
Okay. How does the teaching profession rank among other professions in St. Lucia, you think?
And when you say rank, what do you mean?
Do we say in people's perception, is it in the top 3? Is it in the top 5?
What I can tell you is that persons speak very highly of the need for education, and they speak very highly of teachers and the work that they do. If you speak to most people in the society, they tell you how much they empathize with teachers, how much teachers give of themselves, of their own resources. But if you ask, so they value teachers and the work that teachers do, but some of them, because of what they know teachers have to undergo, they don't even want to be teachers. Many of our students, and it has happened in schools where you take a poll and most students don't want to be teachers because they feel that teachers are giving a lot, but the returns are so scarce.
But do you think the current crop of teachers, even they want to be teachers? Is a case of, for example, because of the high rate of unemployment, they do not have a choice, they do not have alternative jobs to go to, and therefore they turn to teaching?
Well, like all professions, there may be a small percentage that perhaps they, because, well, what else to do? But I think by and large, from my own interaction with teachers, and I do a lot of that, the vast majority of persons in the teaching profession are there because they love teaching, they love children, they want to work with children. I know many teachers who perhaps could have gotten other opportunities, and I know there are people who have left the banks and left other places and come into teaching because they say, that's what I want to do. I want to help children. You may not get a lot in terms of economic benefits, but when you take a group of children at the beginning of the year, and then you can see these children progress, and at the end of the year, you can see where you've brought them, and when later in life you see them and they interact with you, they communicate with you, that is where the joy comes from. And so a lot of people are happy most people are happy to be teachers because they feel they're making a difference.
What about when you see students who are falling through the cracks?
Yes, and as you know, the St. Lucia Teachers Union, we organize our first ever Calypso show this year for teachers, and the winning song, in fact, was about that we we have to take some responsibility also for those who fall from the crack, through the crack. And yes, we are aware of it, and we cannot just blame everybody else. However, it is fair to say that if we were given more resources in many of our schools, if the student-teacher ratio was a little lower, if ministries of education would look at financing more programs, for example, if more of our schools had more special education teachers, etc., then fewer would fall from the crack.
What do you think was the ideal teacher-student ratio?
Ideal, I don't know. I don't want to, because you would have to look at schools, you have to look at circumstances, you want to look at programs available in schools, etc. What I can tell you as a principal, I'm a principal also, anytime a class gets close to 30 and over 30, I get very, very, very worried, because once 25, 30, it means that you're reducing the opportunities for individual attention. Now, some of the students learn very well, okay, in a big class, but they're the students who need the teacher to be able to come around and assist and, give the encouragement. When you have a 40-minute lesson, and that's difficult in a very large class.
But now we're hearing of, there's so many schools in St. Lucia that do not have the full student population because of the low growth in terms of childbirth and so on. Don't you think that we can have a situation where we can have smaller classes because of this?
And we should.
In most of our schools?
And we should. And I mean, sometimes I heard the Ministry of Finance want to argue that the teaching service is overstaffed. And it puzzles me. I don't understand that. So I say, if you're talking about schools being overstaffed, then you must indicate to us which programs you want us to cut. Do you want to cut out the special needs program? Do you want to cut out music? Do you want to cut out physical education? Because many schools are moving into these programs, and we must, because we know what sports can do. There are a lot of people who make millions of dollars in sports, employed in sports. We know we're talking about moving into a service industry, and we know what music and theater arts and drama and those things can do for that industry. So those things we have to factor into, and more as you want to encourage the children to go in. It cannot be done, as a side subject. So you want people who are trained and qualified and are enthusiastic about those things to teach them.
How do you deal with the problem involving maths? Because year after year, at the level of common entrance and CXC and CSEC and so on, we all see the evidence that the students are underperforming when it comes to maths. And generally, I'm sure that the government, the authorities will tell you that they are investing a lot in the education system, and they're expecting to get the ROI, return on investment. Can we say that teachers are not delivering when it comes to maths?
Well, I don't know about teachers not delivering, because they're doing the very best.
So what is the problem?
So, and the question of mathematics underperformance, or what we call underperformance, is not a St. Lucian phenomenon. It is worldwide. In some countries, they cannot even find mathematics teachers and science teachers. So it's a global problem. But that's not an excuse, because in St. Lucia, we need to see what we can do. Perhaps we need to look at the curriculum. Perhaps we need to look at whether it's in fact not too heavy. Are we not expecting too much from the children in mathematics before they can master some basic concepts? Are we not moving the children too quickly? Because there's some things, once you master, the rest, you see, I've argued that if you children must work addition of fractions, you know how many processes, you know how many other little concepts just apart from addition of fractions. So if you teach these children early, and we take our time and we help them master basic concepts, we would not be wasting time. Perhaps by the time they get to the higher grades, they would have been so versed in all of the basic concepts that they would be able to. So perhaps we're trying to build too much on a foundation that we have not taken time to develop.
Why are we saying perhaps right now, when this problem dates back to at least a decade or probably even more? Haven't we taken the time out to do the analysis, to carry out the studies to find out exactly what is the problem so that we could deal with it?
Certainly not sufficient.
Shouldn't the charge be led by educators?
Yes, but you know the way things go in St. Lucia. The practitioners are hardly involved. What you get is policy being handed down. And that is one of the things that we've been complaining about. The practitioners, the people who are in the field, the people who you need to engage them.
But if you care about the profession, shouldn't you hand over a paper, a document to the authorities, and then you could lay blame at their feet?
The authorities are spending millions of dollars in consultancy and they put it on the shelf. You really think it's a teacher writing a paper that they'll take seriously?
But have you tried?
I'm sure teachers have tried. Let me tell you. Oh yeah. Every teacher, it was stopped just recently, but every teacher who went to teachers college up to just recently had to do a study. And those studies would be based on problems in schools, whether it's mathematics, English, teaching of certain topics, etc. And if you go to the library at the mall and if you speak to some teachers, they can bring you hundreds of studies that have been carried out in schools. But that doesn't mean we have quite a number of teachers who are doing the Bachelor's of Education degree and doing research in education. We have persons who are doing, and the ministry is, as a matter of fact, now to do research in schools, even if you're a teacher, you must get permission from the ministry. So they know all the studies that have been carried out in school. At the end of the day, that informs nothing. It all boils down to what the hierarchies in the ministry think is the problem and how they want to resolve it.
But teachers must be feeling very awful with regard to the performance of their students in maths. They must be blaming themselves. Are you all blaming yourself for this?
Let me tell you, nobody suffers more than a teacher when a class does not do well. Trust me. If you go, for example, whether it's CXC minimum standards or common entrance class exam, you know how many teachers lose sleep? I used to teach common entrance. Well, that's the class I taught for most of my years as a classroom teacher before becoming a principal. And when these results are about to come out, you know how many sleepless nights you have in wondering, boy, what is the performance? Did my students do well? You know, so it is out of concern for students. So teachers,
and concern for your reputation as well as a teacher?
Well, yes, but more the students. Teachers, they hardly think about, well, me, how I look. Did my students do well? Because, let's face it, at the end of the day, the teacher doesn't suffer any consequence. So when that teacher is feeling that pain, it's not about the teacher.
But the teacher can benefit.
About the students.
The teacher can benefit from this in terms of the reputation, in terms of that teacher being able to make extra money by giving additional lessons.
Well, that is for classes that do the national exam. Most about the other classes, the teachers feel the same thing. I have seen teachers in a very bad state because they've given tests, their own test. They've taught and they've given the test. And when they see the children's performance, they're in a bad state because they cannot understand those results. It has nothing to do. The public or the ministry would not know. It's just that, oh Lord, look at the performance.
What should be done with the current curriculum?
When the curriculum is being reviewed, teachers must be a little more involved. Now, of late, there's some involvement. So you call but at the end of the day, many teachers would tell you that after all the discussion and the engagement, whatever is done does not resemble what they propose.
Who reviews the curriculum?
Well, the Ministry of Education. The Ministry of Education has the responsibility for education. And
should that be the case?
Should lead.
Should that be the case?
Yes, the ministry has that's the department that the public, the society has decided will lead the charge on education, and so they must have the leadership there. But that leadership, and I'm using the word leadership, that leadership must involve people. And who are the people? The practitioners. Those who are in the classroom who can tell you what the situation is, where we need to make the changes, what are the difficulties. And you must take them seriously.
Must there be a change in attitude in terms of how decisions are made? Must it come from the hierarchy of the Ministry of Education, or should it come from, let's say, the teaching staff and go up?
And
should the reverse be made?
Yeah, and there must not be. There's no science as to where it come from. It must be an engagement. So ideas can come from it can be bottom up as well as it can be top down. But the idea is that you are having engagement.
But you would like to see changes in the curriculum?
What I would like to see is that we consistently look at the curriculum.
When was the last review? Do you know?
The last review, I would say perhaps maybe 4 years ago, and I might be wrong on that, but I'd say 4 years ago. And again, I don't know there is a big general review at any one time of all the subjects. They may look at maths at one time, or social studies, or science at another.
Do we need a general review? And should we seek outside assistance in terms of undertaking that particular exercise?
We have more than enough qualified people in this education system. What perhaps we need to do is, rather than just talk about curriculum review, we need to probably begin a discussion on what kind of citizen we want to produce. Once you've decided that, I mean, like CARICOM have the ideal Caribbean person, what is the ideal St. Lucian person? If you've decided that, then around that you can determine what you do in schools and in the education system.
So what kind of citizen are we producing right now?
I think the education system is doing a fairly good job with very little resources being given to teachers. I've seen education benefited us very well. A few years ago, there were just a handful of families that you could have said living very well. Right now it's not so, and a lot of the people who've made it, who've climbed the ladder, who are in the upper class, in the upper middle class, etc. Education has brought them there. All of them, or most of them. And so education has done well. However, we need to continue to look at it and see, in fact, what are the changes, because education is dynamic.
You're watching Newsmaker Live right here on DBS Television. My guest this evening, the president of the St. Lucia Teachers Union and the Caribbean Union of Teachers, Mr. Julian Monrose. We'll continue the discussion in just a moment, and later, your calls. Welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with us. Once again, you're watching Newsmaker Live on DBS Television. My name is Timothy Polio, and my guest is Mr. Julian Monrose, president of the SLTU and the CUT. We continue our discussion and, of course, later, your calls. We currently facing a major challenge. Earlier on, you said that with regard to people's economic situation, those have improved immensely over the last few years among a larger section of the society because of education. Can we also use education to address our current crime problem? 41 homicides already for this year. What can the education sector do to address this menace?
Yeah, there are a number of things that contribute to an individual and how understanding of life and respect for life, and certainly education is one of them. And it is why earlier on I was making the point that we really need to look at the school system and provide the resources, because some of these people, they come from homes that fail them. They're into the education system, and they believe that the education system has let them down, that the society is letting them down, and some of them don't see a real purpose in life, and so therefore, there's no respect for life. So we need to ensure that from very early we can train them, well, not train, but to teach them the value of life, to teach them how to cope with problems, and to have an education system that's more understanding of some of the problems that some of them go through, and also to the schools perhaps, it's not our role. Our role really is to deal with the children. But and some schools are already moving into that we have to in fact get involved in parenting classes to teach parents how to parent, how to take care of the children, how to relate to the children, because very often some of them come to school even at age 5 already messed up, and the school system is expected to deal with that. So we have to go beyond our mandate, because if we don't, then it makes our work even more difficult.
Is that an initiative you think that some agency or maybe the Ministry of Education can undertake, the teaching of parents how to undertake the task?
Yes, I think that perhaps, because every parent wants the child, almost want the child in school by age 5. And perhaps at that level, before the children enter school, parents should be, and maybe the Education Act can reflect that parents must attend, certain sessions, we won't call it classes, sessions, etc., that help them, because some of them is not deliberate. Some of them don't know how to cope, So it is not a case of they just giving up or doing anything. They don't know. And we have a society where before the grandmother was a little more senior and understood life a little more differently and could assist. Now the grandmother is still learning and very young herself, or the grandfather for that matter. What the ministry has done, however, I want to say, and that over the last few years, is to put counselors at the secondary schools and in the district offices. And I think our counselors are doing a tremendous job. Trust me.
So you think the situation could have been worse?
Oh, yes. If it wasn't for these counselors, perhaps by now we wouldn't recognize. And I can speak to, the evidence where that is concerned. If this wasn't for this counselor, I'm feeling the situation, because we've seen so many students that these counselors have brought back. The problem is they are overwhelmed. These counselors are overwhelmed. And if we don't do something, we may even frustrate them. In that, just the secondary schools, you're talking a secondary school with 500, 600, 700 children, with one counselor. You're talking a district counselor servicing 8, 9, 10 primary schools. Every day, each of these schools calling the counselor to deal with a situation. These counselors are not only working with children, but they're working with parents. So we're saying that, okay, at the beginning, in the early days, that's about 10 years ago, they introduced counselors at the primary school and at the district level. The time has come for us to have counselors in the primary schools, because what we're doing, the system is not right. What we're doing is that we're allowing them to almost fall through the crack and try to save them when they get to the secondary school. Because yes, the district counselors are intervening and they have a lot, but how many students? If you have 10 schools and each of these schools call you for 5, and trust me, it's usually more than 5. How do you in 1 week, in 1 month, handle all of these children, work with the parents, So the ministry, we have to invest in saving our children. Now, yes, we have a society where some people don't believe in counseling, and they believe that counseling is spoiling children. But that's a really myopic and uneducated view of the work that counselors do. Okay, because sometimes they're the ones who can help these children get into themselves and realize, no, that's not the kind of individual that I should be. I can be a better individual and work with, but they cannot do that just with the child. They also have to work with the teachers, so that the teachers can help these children and also work with the parents. So we need to invest in, and you see, we have to make the decision. Either we're going to invest with them in them in the early ages, or invest in them at more delay. That's the choice that we have. I say let's capture them early.
Several years ago, pregnancy in the school system, that it appeared to be rampant. What is the situation now?
I would be able to give you in terms of statistics but again, here is what. It's education. It's education. We need to be able to, and we have the health and family life program in our schools. It begins from the infant school. I think that has helped quite a bit. Even if some of the teachers don't even have the training in health and family life, they're just implementing a syllabus. But I think that has helped to make our young ladies and the young men to understand the need to respect their bodies, to understand that sometimes you can compromise your future by irresponsible behavior. So in terms of statistics, I don't know, but I think we're making some headway in that. I think the younger people are understanding. But education sometimes takes time.
The rate of expulsion and suspension in schools.
That one is an issue. Yes, I believe that every child's place is in school. That we have to make sure that when they leave school, that they have a solid education and that they are the best possible persons that they can be. Some of our students, the reality is that they are so difficult to manage, and sometimes the principals and the teachers find it overwhelming, especially at the secondary schools. You have so many of them to deal with. You're not getting the cooperation of the parents, etc. But we have to find a way out of this.
Out of expulsion.
Out of expulsion. Mm-hmm. We must. There is nothing to say that a child cannot change. There is nothing to say with the right intervention. But when you send a child out of school, where do you send him to? You send him to the block. You send him to the seasoned criminals. So we've been saying to the ministry, and every year we're hearing the pronouncements, but we're not seeing the reality. There needs to be some kind of institution, not run like a mini prison. Some school where these children can go to. So you're unable to find your way here.
What about young people being subjected to national service?
That if that is going to help, yes, maybe something to really make them check themselves but it must never be. Changing young people must not be about punishment, because if you're going to use national service as a form of punishment, then you're making them think that national service is bad. Nobody likes punishment. So yes, we can introduce that. It can probably make it, if it is meant to make them more responsible, but it shouldn't be as a form of punishment.
But what obtains now? If, for example, a student is behaving in such a manner that he or she is unruly, and therefore this is proving very troublesome for the teaching staff, teachers, the principal, etc., how do the authorities deal with that issue?
Well, under the Education Act, you can suspend a child for maximum, a principal can suspend the child for maximum of 10 days for gross misbehavior, and must report that matter to the chief education officer. And the chief education officer makes a decision as to what happens beyond those 10 days. In some cases it is so, because, for example, if you get a child threatening a teacher, or threatening the teacher's life, or threatening other students, sending the child home for 5 days and coming back in the face of students and teachers, and especially for repeated offenses, it's almost like we're empowering them. Well, I can do what I want, and I will go home for 3 days or 4 days or 5 days, and I'm able to come back and in your face. We have to be careful with that, and most times these children are out there with no serious intervention. So it's not that you're out for 10 days and you're somewhere where somebody's working with you, helping with the behavior modification.
Just on vacation.
Just on vacation. Mm-hmm. And sometimes learning more bad habits to come back to school. So the authorities need to invest in that kind of, and where these children can get that assistance. And as I say, the district council and the school councillors, the numbers we have now, not sufficient. You need to have a more solid and focused counseling regime in place.
School dropouts, how Is that an area of immense concern? Because people are talking about, for example, in the heyday of the banana industry in the 70s and 80s and so on, many young people were not going to school primarily to take care of the plantation or even to take care of their brothers and sisters and so on. Is that still a factor in terms of children dropping out of school and truancy?
From the statistics that I have seen, I think that is more at the secondary school level, particularly at some schools and when it gets to Form 3. Now we have a situation where the reality is students, we have some children it appears that they're the parents of the parents, because it is what they say. You have parents who couldn't control 5-year-olds and 10-year-olds. And so what I think is happening, no serious research has been done on that. Once these children get to a certain age and they decide I'm no longer going to school, because it happens more past Form 2 to Form 3 level, that's it. Because the parents are unable to insist. And in some cases, the past age 15, the school attendance officer, and there's only one on island to serve 100 and something schools. Could you imagine?
At one time we had 2?
Yes, I think we had 2 at one time, but I know only one exists now. Or there was allowance for 2, I think. The law says 15, compulsory school age, 5 to 15. So you couldn't go and insist. The school attendance officer couldn't insist that a 16-year-old. And so even that, because we have the Education Act that says schooling is compulsory from 5 to 15, but we have the Labor Code that gives a different age group in terms of when you can get into active employment. So even those things that we need to address.
Which is what, 16?
16. We need to address those things. We need to address also whether we want all our secondary schools to be 5-year secondary schools. Because the number of children, and we must not just put the blame on the children, the number of children who enter some of the secondary schools having not done too well at the common entrance. So it means that you've not mastered the prerequisites, but you put into a normal 5-year secondary school program. But if you did not cope well enough with the primary school requirement, you did not master the basic skills, how do you build on that foundation? So we have said as a union, we have said to the ministry time again that you probably need to look at that and see whether in fact some of your secondary schools should not be 7-year schools, where the first 2 years these children are doing more basic to build the foundation, so that because we cannot treat school like factory. You just go through, and that is what is happening in some cases.
What has been the response of the Ministry of Education to that?
Well, as usual, the ministry is always going to look into everything.
and as usual, the educators will adopt a wait-and-see attitude.
Well, we couldn't change schools into 6 or 7 year school. So what we must do, and the teachers, if you speak to the teachers, that's the frustration, because you have students, they're not ready, they don't have the foundation, but you must get them ready. So at the end of the day, you're frustrating students and you're frustrating teachers. So what you have is 5 years, and you must just do what you can in the 5 years.
Can we link this to USC, the problems associated with USC and how probably it was introduced, Universal Secondary Education?
USC was one of the most progressive things that happened in education in St. Lucia. What we have not done is, having introduced USC, we have not looked at post-USC. So USC now is about, 11 or 12 years? We have not done a study. We have not looked at it and see, okay, where are the
So we never envisaged that students were not prepared at the primary school level to enter the secondary school level, that they themselves in the end would become problems for the system. We never envisaged that?
No, we did. As a matter of fact, I remember then the teachers union had a serious quarrel with the then Minister of Education in terms of that, in terms of programs. But we also accepted that, look, You couldn't end the child's life. That's what we were doing before. At age 12, you're saying to a child, you're not good enough. Your life ends there. We couldn't. So the secondary school, and we understood the psychology that some children are late developers. So you need to give them a chance and not end their life at age 12. That's why I say it was progressive. We then had to, having done that, we had to now look at, okay, what programs that we can put in place to assist those who may be struggling. That we have not done well.
And why you think we have not put in place the various measures to look after the interests of those students?
Because we keep talking about it, but not putting the policies in place and making the hard decisions. Let me tell you, meaningful decisions are never easy to make, from my experience. But we must make the hard decisions. We must see whether we must make a decision whether we are just postponing the problem from primary school into secondary school, or whether we're going to use secondary school as another level to address the problems.
You're watching Newsmaker Live with my guest, President of the SLTU. He's also head of the CUT, Mr. Julian Monrose. When we come back, your calls. Stay with us. Welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with us. Once again, you're watching Newsmaker Live right here on DBS Television. We'll put a telephone number on the screen so that you can call right now with your questions and your comments. For my guest, he is Mr. Julian Monrose, who's the president of the St. Lucia Teachers Union and also is head of the Caribbean Union of Teachers. We are very much into Teachers Week in St. Lucia, and tomorrow is World Teachers Day. We have our first caller line. As we say, a very good evening to you. Please go ahead with your contribution, caller.
Yes, good evening.
Hi, good evening to you, ma'am.
Good night. Happy Teachers Week.
Thank you.
To Mr. Monrose.
Thank you.
I'm calling tonight.
Okay, ma'am, there's a feedback. Your television is on and you're listening to the television. So please, if you could walk away from the television set or turn on the volume and then go ahead with your contribution, please.
Okay, it was in the other room.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay, I'm calling tonight about, I would like the next collective agreement with the government to be the TMA that we're receiving in September. I was wondering if we can get it for every term. That would be very helpful. Also, Mr. Monrose, you asked some question about, not Mr. Monrose, Mr. Timothy, you asked some question about the school being overstaffed. I have a problem with the school I'm currently working at. The lab is not being used. We have a nice lab, but we're not using it because we have no IT teacher, and not my school alone. There is another school. The lab is just there, shut, because we have nobody to teach the students information technology. I would really like the Ministry of Education to do something about that, because we are living in a technological world. Children need to know things about such, so that when they go in the world of work, they'll be equipped. And the younger you begin these technologies with these children, the better it will be when they grow older. Have a good night.
All right, thank you so much. You as well, ma'am. We continue to take your calls, and Mr. Producer, the interference, the music in the background there. Okay, thank you so much. As we continue to take your calls, hello, good evening, you're on the air. Hello.
Good evening, Mr.
Hi.
Monrose, Mr. Timothy.
Good evening to you, caller.
You know what, Mr. Monrose, I hope you're not political what you're doing there tonight. Yeah, Mr. Monrose, that's Mr. Bissett speaking to you. We're always on the square and talking to you, and I always have you as a man, and I appreciate you.
If you have a question, go ahead. If you have a comment, go ahead. But please, I don't like the direction you're going in. I think you're meandering.
Okay. Mr. Monrose is very political.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's move on. We continue to take your calls. Once again, this is Newsmaker Live right here on DBS Television. I will not pose any question to you because I suspect we'll be having another call coming in anytime from now. So let's see, Mr. Producer, do we have a call in line? No, we don't. But please, Mr. Producer, we hear some music in our earpiece. Can you just attend to it for me, please? Okay. Mr. Monrose, let us look at another area of concern, and that is the use of technology. I think our caller before the last make reference to it. Are we still using chalk and blackboard and so on?
Yes, we're using chalk and blackboard, and I think chalk and blackboard will continue to have its place for a while. I mean, new technology does not necessarily mean that you throw out what you have, so it may have its place. But the reality is, and we must not just look at technology just in terms of tablets and phones and things. So the chalk and blackboard is a form of technology. It may have been a form of technology for a particular time. But yes, the caller is right that we need to create a use of the modern technology in our schools, because we're developing children for a world that is very, very technologically oriented, and not just in terms of use, just being able to have a gadget, but in terms of how you access information, how you process information, etc. So that's very, very important.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Hi, good evening to you. Go ahead, please.
Good evening to you.
Hi, good evening to you, caller.
And good evening to Mr. Monrose.
Good evening.
Mr. Monrose, I want to challenge you on a number of things that you said there tonight. I might not be able to focus on all, so I suspect Tim will stop me when he's ready. First of all, you seem not to be aware that St. Lucia does not have a curriculum. Tim asked you a question about the curriculum. St. Lucia does not have a curriculum for as long as I know. And maybe I can just stick to maths with you. Because a curriculum is supposed to be like a national document, like a standard of what obtains or what should obtain across the country. It would have the content that you're supposed to teach the children, the core values, saying what you expect children to achieve, the instructional methods that your teachers must follow. Now, without saying your teachers can be creative, they can use alternate methods they believe can work. But when the methods are not working, then they must stick to national methods that have been proven and tested. Then there must be relevant resources to assist them, and there must be evaluation methods. All that must be standardized across schools. But what we have now in your school, Mr. Morris, and in most of the schools in the country, what you call the syllabus. It's like a microcosm of a curriculum. So in your school, Mr. Monrose, when a new teacher comes, you give that teacher a syllabus, a register, a scheme on record book, 2 sticks of chalk, a duster, and you tell your teacher that's your classroom day. So that teacher is supposed to go there and use his or her own methodologies to teach the people's children.
Okay, let me allow Mr. Monrose to respond. Hold on, caller.
I'm not too certain that you are very current on what you are suggesting there. I am very much aware that curriculum exists for practically every subject. I'm even aware that the Ministry of Education has just even introduced the whole thing on education for democratic citizenship. We have our debates on that, but even during the summer, training was provided for teachers for the implementation of that. And so I don't know that you're very correct on what you're saying. And the other thing is that we have gone past what you're saying, because what the ministry have done is to deliberately have a policy where, as much as possible, the ministry is employing teachers who have come out of Teachers College. So gone are the days when most persons began teaching without teacher training. That is almost a thing of the past now. So teachers are coming having been exposed to pedagogy, understanding the methodology of teaching, etc.
Yes, go ahead, caller.
Mr. Monrose.
Yeah, go ahead.
Tell me one place I can go, even to see an old curriculum, because you seem to be not understanding me. I'm telling you that there is no curriculum in this country, Mr. Monroe. Come on, where are you from?
Well, I beg. The last thing I say on this is I beg to differ.
Okay, but let's move on to your other issue, caller.
Now, my other issue, Mr. Monroe, you said children come to the school system as early as 5, and they're all messed up, and you have to go above and beyond your mandate, something to that effect, you know. Mr. Monroe, I'm saying to you, the teachers in this country, because there is not a curriculum, they teach using their own methods. That's what I'm saying to you. I'm not telling you that they're not trained or they didn't go to training college. I went to training college, Mr. Monroe.
Okay.
But it was still left to me to use my own teaching methods in the classroom.
And that's what teaching is about.
And
That is what academic freedom is about.
You see the fractions you talk about? The fractions you talk about, Mr. Monroe. I'm certain that in your school, that there are teachers teaching fractions and LCM and HCF and percentages and decimals differently in your school. Now, if there is a curriculum, there will be a standard for teaching it. And all teachers are supposed to follow that standard and do it in the way that the nation expects it to be done. Good night, Mr. Monroe.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you so much
have
for
a
calling,
very
sir.
good night. Yeah.
You made a point earlier on. I'll like give you an opportunity to expound on it. That is education on democratic citizenship.
Yes.
Yeah. What's this?
It is a program that is meant to build good, positive citizens, people who understand their role as citizens to contribute more meaningfully to national development, to the development of community, who will understand that we spoke about the whole question of crime and violence and those things that they don't work, how we can resolve issues.
As being introduced during this academic year?
Yes, it was.
Okay, let's take a call. Good evening, Newsmaker Live, you're on the air.
Hi, good evening, Tim.
Hi, good evening to you, ma'am.
I have a concern. Just a scenario. I had a son who was in public school, on the island, right? And he was different, not differently able. He was just a different child. You know, he stuck to himself, very antisocial. They sent me to do so many tests. They said he was dyslexic, he was autistic, he was a whole lot of things. And I had to go, referred me to Dr. Bird and all of that. But he was really demotivated at the school because they called him lazy, you know, the regular jackass, that kind of thing the teachers called him. But I knew him at home, and I know he wasn't that. He was just, you know, to himself, and we didn't find a way, or the teachers couldn't find a way to bring out whatever. So I took him out of public school, and I put him into private school. And, you know, I have not regretted that at all. It really worked for him. Even in his infant school, they repeated him 2 classes back. They brought him back, and that demoted him. He would say that demotivated him. He would say to me, "Mommy, I'm sorry, but I really hate school. I really hate going to school." Okay, so we moved him into private school, and that worked well for him. He went into secondary school, and do you know that when he got to secondary school, he was moved up. The minute he hit forms 1, he was moved up 2 classes higher than his form. So I don't know if it started in Form 1, if it started in private school, but it really didn't work in the public school. So I'm saying if there's a parent that cannot afford private school, I mean, those children are lost. What's going to happen to them?
Well, I cannot answer that question.
Okay.
Because the
Thank you so much for calling, ma'am.
Yeah, the person is speaking about a specific case, and I don't know how much exaggeration there is to that or what the real facts are. To be able to speak to that particular case, I would have to have all of the facts. I don't.
But
what I can tell you, though, is that in our school system, we've seen a lot of students who have a lot of issues, and sometimes have nothing to do with the parent or to the child. Or the child. And sometimes our teachers don't have the training to deal with that particular time. Some of these children need special attention that the teachers may not be trained to handle.
We have a call. Good evening.
Yes, good evening.
Hi, good evening to you, caller.
Well, my concern is that teachers have no respect for children, especially in the primary school. If a teacher can tell the student, I don't sleep in the same bed as your mother and your father, how do you expect that child to respect the teacher? So I think the ministry really needs to scrutinize these teachers. Send, I don't know what they need to send to the schools to observe these teachers' teaching methods. Some of them don't even show to class. They sit in the classroom and the children are basically left on their own, like having double periods and no teacher. So I need to know what are these teachers being paid for. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I can assure you, Tim, that is not a reality in our education system. I'm not saying there may not be an isolated incident. In every profession, there will be people, and sometimes I ask people, where do they think teachers come from? They think teachers fall from heaven. Certainly, we didn't.
But you just,
we are citizens. We come from the same society, the same community, and we are human too.
Yeah,
yes,
but
we're teachers.
They're part of a noble,
yes,
noble profession, and a lot is expected
like all
from
professions,
them.
like all. Okay, there will be the small, the tiny minority that will embarrass the profession. Okay, but by and large, and what we will see, and it's a usual thing in St. Lucia, that there may be one incident and people want to generalize it, but you know, nobody generalizes all of the sacrifice that teachers make in our system. But one teacher makes a mistake and every teacher is bad. I mean, it's a reality that we'll face. We'll face it, but we will continue to do our work with the limited resources and what we have.
We have a call. Good evening, Newsmaker Live, you're on the air.
All the time, they don't
Okay,
think.
all right. Let's say goodbye to this call. Let's say goodbye to this caller, producer. Don't you think, Mr. Monrose, you're being a little you're being defensive?
No, I'm telling you the reality.
Because if the majority of my callers were to call into this program and praise teachers, you say thank you, thank you, thank you. And if one were to say that we're dissatisfied with the performance of one or two or three teachers, then you say that those are in the minority.
But that's what. But you say that one or two or three is minority.
But that makes a difference in terms of what happens in the classroom, in terms of the performance of the students. You're talking about a teacher-student ratio of, let's say, a teacher to 35 students. That would impact 35 students. That's a huge number. At the expense, and it's a situation where one teacher is underperforming, affecting 35 students.
And then we need to find ways of dealing with those teachers who seek to bring the profession into disrepute. Certainly.
What the hell you are talking about?
We have a call. Hello.
Hi.
Good evening. You're on the air.
Good evening. Mr. Monrose, good night.
Good night.
I want you to go on Mr. Jugba's show. And I want you to say the very
Okay. Thank you so much.
Right.
Thank you so much. And again, Mr. Producer, let's try and keep this particular individual off the program. But do you think that more can be done on the part of the SLTU? I mean, to ensure that those teachers who are not performing to the satisfaction of parents who are basically paying their salaries, that they really ensure that they do that?
I don't know I can speak to teachers who are not performing to the satisfaction of the parents. What I can
but the parents are clients.
What I can what I can speak to is teachers who may not be performing as the system expects. Teachers who may be bringing the profession into disrepute. The St. Lucia Teachers Union has a code of ethics. We didn't wait for the ministry to develop it. We develop it.
In my years of interviewing you, you say that all the time.
Yes.
Yeah, you say that all the time.
Because it's true. I didn't remember I told you that.
You say that all the time.
Because it's true.
But how often you use that code of ethics?
Very often. Very often. Most times I address teachers, I visit schools, I quote our code of ethics and the expectation of the Teachers Union.
We have a call. Good evening.
Good evening, Tim. Good
Hi.
evening, Mr. Monrose.
I expected you to call, sir. Good evening to you.
Happy celebrations to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Two things you said that concern me a little, and One that, that the students-teachers ratio is too high. But when Tim asked you what would be the ideal, you said you didn't know. But this much you know that it's too high. And, I think you should have an idea of what would be the ideal in your situation. Because as far as I know, in even developed countries that, say for example in America, it's higher than what obtains here. And the other thing is that care, for example, care has, I think, and I've been reasonably informed that the graduates of care have the highest employment rate throughout all the schools. Isn't there something you could learn from CARE's program? Or is it that most of the schools, the secondary schools, are preparing students for higher education and not necessarily preparing them for employment?
Hold that point, Mr. Morris.
Yes. Well, first on the American thing, I don't know, but certainly some of what is happening, because we have America, and some of us think it's all great, but I can tell you something. Some of what is happening in some American schools, you wouldn't want to have for sure. I can assure you of that. But let's deal with the more substantive point of care. The teachers' union some years ago had in fact engaged the ministry, because you're correct, the care program seemed to be working very well. There's evidence that it is working very well for the students that attend the care, no doubt about it. And our position was, couldn't the Ministry of Education not engage care so that in some of our secondary schools, some of the element of that, if not the whole thing, can be or work with care so that more of our students can benefit. I know at some point there was the engagement between the Ministry of Education and the officials of care in that regard. I don't know where that discussion is right now, but I know clearly, and I agree with the caller, that the care program seem to be, not seem, but is working, and perhaps we need to look at it.
Caller?
And I think we definitely have to look at what care is doing. And also you said the ideal, you referred to what you call the ideal solution, but you didn't really define what's the ideal solution you're trying to produce there,
Oh no, I wasn't. That is not for me. That is for all of us. I was just saying we must determine as a people, as a nation, what we consider the ideal solution, and let that determine, what happens in schools, etc. Because we need to know who at the end of the day, what type of citizen at the end of the day we want to produce.
Yeah, but certainly, as a teacher, you've been interacting with, educating youngsters from a long, long time.
Mm-hmm.
You would have an idea, and I thought probably you would prefer your idea, to the rest of us.
Yeah, not here now.
Not here, not.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Teachers leaving for greener pastures, is this still happening?
To some extent.
Okay.
Not. I don't think it's to a very large extent.
Okay, we have a call. Good evening. Go ahead, please, with your contribution.
Good evening, Matthew. Good
Hi.
evening to Mr. Monroe.
Good evening to you, sir.
Good
Okay.
evening, okay.
I have possibly some tough questions. I hope easy questions nonetheless. So, Mr. Monroe, well versed. 4 questions, please, Mr. Monroe. The first one: boys have never outperformed girls at the common entrance level. Why is that?
We have a situation with boys' performance, and again, it's not an excuse. It's not just a St. Lucia thing. It's a Caribbean thing. It's Dr. Harold Mira some years ago, wrote this book, Men at Risk, and I think, from a personal perspective, perhaps we need to look at the books that we produce and put in schools. Are they really appealing reading to boys, the stories, the material in them? Are they what boys really want to read, to encourage them to read? Because we know how important reading is. We have to look at that. The reality is, and I'm sure some my members will understand what I'm saying, we have a highly feminized education system, particularly at the infant and primary school levels. So are the boys interacting with enough men who can motivate them and be role models for them, etc. So these are some of the issues that there's a whole science on how boys learn. There's a whole science of left brain and right brain, and which side of the brain that the boys in, and whether you're teaching to the left brain, etc. Yeah, so these are the kind of issues that we need to look at.
What I'm looking at, Mr. Monroe, is that we see, even statistically, at least one boy should have outperformed girls. So even through pure mathematics or logic, whatever you want to put in there, boys should have outperformed girls at least one. And I'm therefore suggesting, hasn't the time come when we look at some form of scaling within the secondary school system? And I'm looking at entry. For example, a school like Cassius Comprehensive, Leon Hess, Gifford Comprehensive, all those schools that take in both boys and girls, shouldn't at the Form 1 level that you're taking in 120 students, you're taking 60 girls and 60 boys. It should not be a matter of, for example, just purely on grades, because we know for some reason boys cannot outperform the girls, and therefore they're not on par with the girls. So what we have been doing is essentially putting the girls in the better schools, quote unquote, and putting the boys in the not better schools, quote unquote. And therefore we are destroying the boys even from that early age. Could that be a possible reason for the crime situation in St. Lucia? I mean, if you hear a girl commit a crime, you say, nah, that a girl? Of course not. A boy committed a crime, well, that's expected, man. What school he came from? Oh, that's school. Yeah, that's expected. It's not St. Mary's College. That doesn't happen to St. Mary's College students. You know what I mean? So I'm saying, are we at the point where we should accept at entry level in the secondary school system, you are taking 100 students, boys and girls, 50% girls, 50% boys. Of course, you can take them based on grades, but grades, boys are not competing with girls. Boys are competing with boys, girls are competing with girls.
That's a very interesting perspective. One, I don't want to put my neck on the block on to say, well, I agree with or disagree with. But you certainly, it's an interesting perspective that I will be thinking about. And I'm sure perhaps among educators we can look at.
Because one thing we have recognized is that in terms of language development, boys by age 5, by age 7, are at least 1.5 to 2 years behind girls. And that is research statistics. So it is nothing about boys and probably the material presented. It may be more something of the biological development, the maturation of boys we're looking at here. And therefore, to have them compete with girls for entry requirements into secondary school, we are therefore punishing our boys. We are punishing them. And as you said, the school system is highly feminized. Our second question, Mr. Monroe, has to do with teacher dress code. I notice people at the banks, they're in uniform. Look at our bus drivers, they're putting themselves in uniform. Mr. Monroe, hasn't the time come for teachers to be in uniform?
And if the students can be in uniform, why not teachers?
Why not the teachers?
Well, the teachers are not students. I don't know on that one. I don't know what can be achieved by putting all teachers on the island in the same uniform. We're not some military group or the other. So I don't, honestly, it is not something I will propose. There can be further discussion on it, but I fail to see what can be achieved. How that makes the education system any better.
Has that issue ever surfaced?
No? No, well, and the other thing too is, if the Ministry of Education chooses to determine, change the regulations and insist that teachers must be in uniform, I hope they're prepared to provide the uniform. If you're going to tell me what I'm going to wear, then you'll have to provide it.
But you personally
are they ready for that?
You personally would not be in support of teachers wearing uniforms to school. You as an individual.
Or as an individual. You see, the interesting thing is that I'm not as an individual. I'm as president of teachers union. And whatever I say, I want to know that the union is behind me. Maybe it might be a discussion at my general council meeting, and thereafter I can perhaps have
You see,
a
my
position.
concern here, Mr. Monroe, has to do with the input that boys receive, boys in particular, the input they receive from the garments worn, particularly by female teachers in our school system. I don't think it augurs well, does it?
What are you saying is distracting?
Very much so.
Well,
I have walked by classrooms, Mr. Polio, where everyone is paying attention, only to realize that the teacher or at the board is dressed in a certain manner. That's why they're paying attention, and the teacher is writing on the board at the same time. Okay, so
I don't know how you could have arrived at that position.
Sometimes it is not, because how do you put a PE teacher in uniform, for example, or theater arts teacher in uniform? You know, certain specialized teachers. There are challenges there, certainly.
Yeah.
One must recognize, and the freedom that a teacher must have is, to me, equal to the freedom that anyone in society must have. We cannot expect, as Mr. Monos rightly recognized, that teachers come from the same stock as society. To have a different expectation of teachers that we would not have of ourselves or other citizens is wrong. If we want our teachers to be disciplined, to work to the best levels of society, that has to be for people at the banks, it has to be for those of us by the market, it has to be for everybody. Don't expect only teachers to be the gods among us. That is wrong. We cannot do that.
All right, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Final comments from you, Mr. Monroes.
The time has gone very quickly. Tim, well, first I want to thank you for having me there as a representative of the Teachers Union to discuss the matter of education. Education is so important to our country. Education is about national development. And the Teachers Union says that to our teachers all the time. When you involve in teaching, you involve in national development, service to nation. So I'm happy to be here to represent the union and to represent teachers' views. One of the things that we didn't touch on is the whole question of the policy on education. One of the things that impact education very seriously is that we have no real national policy on education. If you notice, the position changes depending on who gets into power, who becomes the minister of education. There are some countries where everybody subscribes to a policy. This is the policy. This is where we're going with education. Barbados just across the sea, where there's a national consensus on where we're going with education. So parties come, parties go. They may tweak one or two things, but the education system is forever changing depending on who is in power or who is the minister of education. I think we need to stop that. I think we need to have a national discourse on education, where what we want of education, what kind of education system that we want to see, and everybody, teachers, ministry, parents, private sector, all of us working towards building that education system. Because as I have said, the position of the Teachers Union is that education is about national development.
Mr. Monroes, thank you so much for being my guest on this evening's Newsmaker Live. Thank you so much for watching the broadcast and contributing via your calls. If it's Wednesday, it's Newsmaker Live. Time now for the clip that peaked.
Yesterday, an employer spat in the face of an employee. What would be your reaction if your employer spat in your face?
Nga kwasha fijay li tou oui. Mais oui, pas kwasha fijay moi, so ma moun. Nga foute sel souffle.
And that's the broadcasters. A very good evening. My name is Timothy Napoleon saying good night and see you next time.